Hello, everyone. Welcome to this very special episode of the podcast Circle of Hope. My name is Valerie Hope. I am your host. Well, actually, today I'm kind of not. I'm kind of a host-ish person on this podcast. But the purpose of the podcast is really to highlight and acknowledge the relationships that help us thrive and grow. And over the last few, months now, I've been sharing wonderful conversations with different people to talk about how the relationships in their lives and the relationship that they have with me have influenced both them and myself. You have seen this particular host, my co-host today. You have seen her on one of these episodes. It's been a minute, but I invited Ingrid Gavshon to join me today because for this very special episode, I wanted to focus on completing a cycle or a chapter that this podcast has given me or has been provided. And so what I wanted to do is have a conversation about the podcast or about the process, primarily because as I'm writing a book about everything that I've been doing, this podcast has occupied a lot of time and energy, and I want to devote that or channel that into the book now. I started it with this in mind. I want to make sure that I continue and finish strong. But it might come back. It might come back in a different format. I'm not really sure. But I do honor the idea of honorable closures. I had the privilege and benefit of attending the Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute for my coaching education several years ago and met this amazing woman, highly accomplished documentary producer and director, executive coach, uh, faculty of Berkeley, the Berkeley College, University of California at Berkeley, UC Berkeley. And I don't even know all the things that you do, Ingrid, but not only do you have all of those particular credentials, but you've become a dear friend over the last several years. This is your fifth appearance on one of my podcasts, I believe, because you're just that special. And I knew that if there was anybody that could support me in bringing honorable closure to this chapter, this experience, it would be you. So thank you so much for saying yes to this. And I'm going to hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Valerie. And what an honor it is to be in this seat today as opposed to be in the other seat. And I have always valued our very deep philosophical conversations we've had. We've had a number of conversations in the last year that have really made me think deeply
Hmm.
and made me think about the world differently. And I would love to know from you, because this is the 30th episode or the 31st episode
31st,
of this
yes.
series of you've done more than 200 over the last few years since I
Mhm.
first met you, and they've
My
all been
gosh.
amazing. And you've had extraordinary people with different wide range of subjects. And I really value and look forward to this conversation with you.
Hmm.
You created Circle of Hope, and Hope is your surname too. Why the Circle of Hope, and what did you hope to achieve from this series?
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll start with the impetus for doing it at all was that like I mentioned, in writing this book is a book of about creating a circle of influencers, right? For oneself is finding the right people in life to help achieve goals, to help move obstacles, all of those things. And I've been talking about it for years. I coach people on it, right? It's sometimes people know it as the personal board of directors. Sometimes people know it as, mentorship circles, that sort of thing. But I like to call it a circle of influencers. And as I was writing and spending a lot of time with these, this Word document in front of me, trying to put all these words and taking all the stuff that I've taught in the past and put it into these phrases and paragraphs, I started to find myself getting drained. It was just draining interacting with a piece of, with a digital page. And what I know makes me come to life is talking about things, is talking about ideas, having conversations with other people. And so it kind of became one of those, I should talk about the book, not just write it. I was almost tempted to just like, maybe I don't need a book at all. Maybe I just need this like audio book that never gets made into an actual physical book, but that's not happening. But that's kind of where it was born. And and I realized that the people I wanted to have conversations with were people in my own circle, not just necessarily strangers or people that were recommended as good speakers or good guests to have on podcasts. I wanted to talk to people that I knew, people who had made an impact on my life, that have helped me thrive and grow. And Circle of Hope seemed to be like the most appropriate name because you all are part of my circle.
What is the biggest learning you've had from the last 30 episodes? And is there anyone that
Ah,
stands out for you?
it's interesting because right before this episode aired, I sent a message to my followers just to let people know that, hey, I'm going on a little pause. This is shifting a bit. And because I was putting that together, I wanted to reflect on like what exactly has this meant to me? And so one of the things that was actually surprising, I didn't think that this was be I was thinking more of like the content and like the conversations I've had and what I've learned from the people I've had. But I think the thing, if I really zoomed out, I noticed that in talking about the relationship was something that had greater value than sometimes the relationship itself. I mean, I value every single guest that I've had on the program. Don't get me wrong. This has been a wonderful way to reconnect with old friends. It has been a way to maintain connection with current ones and even establish some new ones. But talking about the relationship is something that we don't do very often. At least I don't, right? You and I can talk about meaningful things, philosophical things, but do we ever talk about like, how did we meet? Why was that impactful? What still inspires us to keep connecting? And that level of insight was quite meaningful. And that was a big learning that I need to talk more about the relationship, not just be in the relationship. And it kind of helps me examine what's working, what needs work, also to appreciate and acknowledge it. I think I mentioned that in the email I sent or the message I recorded. This acknowledgement of what role people have played in my life and theirs just helps amplify the meaning and the importance of the relationship. So I would say those are the main ones.
So you talk about thriving and growing, and you also talk about the relationship. What what would you advise people, since you're writing a book, and this is obviously, I'd love to know more about the book and the direction you plan to take, but this is
Hmm.
obviously going to be a central theme
Yeah.
about people and about relationships, and people might have a conversation, but is it a deep conversation? Is it really meaningful? And I'd love to know, what is your message that you want, that you're hoping other people are going to take away from this last podcast, but also, even more importantly, your
Yeah.
book, because your book
Yeah.
will last forever.
Yeah, I hope. I think that the core message is really that leadership and life is not a solo act, right? It's not a DIY project, as I like to say, not a do-it-yourself project. That when we look back and we see all the hands that have touched our lives, sometimes very directly, like in our case, right? The conversations that you and I've had, we've met in person, we do virtual conversations, but also sometimes indirectly is listening to someone on a podcast say something that sparks an interest or an idea, right? Having overheard a conversation, like those are all people that help us thrive and grow. And I think giving credit and honor to those moments and those relationships is what I want people to take away. And when we get stuck, that's the other part. I mean, I'm kind of a person that I am a person who has struggled with asking for support and guidance for many times in my life. I've found that, yeah, just do it myself or it's not that important. But I had to keep my life pretty small at certain points in order to do things on my own. And as I started taking on bigger responsibilities or my life started to expand, I started to notice that, oh, this can't be a solo act. I definitely need to tap some people in. But then because I have this, like, I can do it myself, already I'm battling that within myself. I also had very high standards of who I brought into my circle. And so the book is really to give people a framework, a way in which to look at how to bring people on in a way that still honors that part of us, right? Because it's a superpower of mine to do things for sure. And I think for many of the people that I work with, it's a superpower to be able to take care of ourselves and do things with, take self-initiative and do things on our own. But I want to work with people's my ability and their ability to expand their range. And so, and being really mindful and intentional about how to do so. So that's what the book is going to do is give people a range, give people tools, and maybe even self-identify as a DIYer where we maybe have resisted that label before.
I think you're talking to a DIY.
We all got it. We have some piece of it.
One of your podcasts was Nuria, your cousin,
Yeah.
and she talked about teams. What resonated for you in that interview that
Mm.
when she talked about the value of having teams and having people that she could rely on that are going to
Yeah.
transmit her vision, because she's a
Mm.
filmmaker, and it was
Yeah.
about how does she get other people to actually engage in that.
Yeah. Well, you know what's funny? Nuria has also been on other podcasts. I've had this, the Circle of Hope was my third. And so we've had plenty of conversations over time about some of her same struggles in trying to find who to trust enough to share her projects with. And so it was a bit of a celebration for me to have her share that she has expanded her vision, has expanded her outreach because she's engaged people who are gifted in the ways that she needed them to be. And that was not necessarily something that I'd heard as clearly in past conversations. And so for me, it was kind of cool to hear like, wow, you're doing so much more now. And things have gone so much further. And she's, hired people or she's engaged, project management and all that sort of thing. So it was an acknowledgement and celebration of how much she's grown. And as a result of that growth, the that's now she has an opportunity to thrive or to help more people with the projects that she engages.
That's wonderful. And I mean, have you heard from other people who you've interviewed over the years, either for Circle of Hope or for Connect to Joy or your other podcast? Have you heard from them about how the podcast has changed their lives? Because I know it certainly changed my perspective. That very first one we did, you asked me one very pivotal question, and it changed my perspective on many things.
Yes, that was the time to come alive. I was so cheeky back then. Have I heard? I don't think I've heard anything. Maybe I don't want to discount that people have had meaningful experience in the podcast. I think so. Nothing stands out to me right now, and part of it maybe is my own humility and like downplaying, like, oh yeah, it was a conversation with a friend, so that was fine. But yeah, there's nothing that stands out to me right now. But I do know that in some cases, I feel like I won. Right. The relationship has deepened in many cases with conversation that we had about the relationship. I think inspiring other people to see their relationship from a new perspective. I have heard from people who were not on the podcast, not guests, that have said, "Oh, wow, I wish I had that relationship with somebody in my life," or I'm gonna start asking that question. So I had some of that, but from guests themselves, since most of them were all people in my circle, I don't know if I distinguished enough what they got from it. Sorry, guests. Tell me if you do. Send me a message if you have.
I certainly will.
Well, no, you can
I
tell me, Ingrid. Why don't would you like to share your what you took away from it or how it impacted you?
First of all, you made me feel really seen and heard and acknowledged. When you invited me, I was in quite a lonely space, lonely at work, lonely and things that happened in my life, which I won't go into, that had left me feeling my joy to life wasn't always there, and that was great. And then you asked me a really pivotal question, which I might ask you too. You said to me, "When did you realize you were white?" And
Ah,
I
yes.
thought that was such a profound question because it was something that I had not actively thought about.
Hmm.
And for months and years afterwards, I started delving into my own memories
Mm.
of my relationship to being a South African and looking. And so I'd like to ask you, because I know you've told me in the past about some of your
Yeah.
experiences, like arriving in, I think it was Florida, at school, having been in Panama. And I'd love to know from you, when did you realize that you were different from other people, maybe around you at the naval bases?
Yeah, yeah. So I want to give people some context because that was a conversation we had in the very first podcast that I hosted, which was called Time to Come Alive. And I don't even know all the ways in which we navigated the conversation, but I do recall us going back to this conversation, that pivotal moment over the years. So I'm so grateful that you engaged me. You didn't shut it out. You didn't like shut me down after that because it could be a very provocative question for many people. But I asked it in earnest because I think it's important for us to have some self-awareness about how we carry ourselves, the world in which we live. And so I will say the story I share about the first time that I realized I was different came from the very first time. I'll give you a little bit of the nugget and I'll talk about maybe something lately, like most recently. So my dad joined the US military, the US Army specifically. And when I was 9 years old, we immigrated from Panama, the capital of Panama, Republic of Panama, to Georgia in the US and lived there for a couple years. I think we moved around maybe to three different, my brothers and I moved to three different elementary schools within a very short period of time. And then we went from Georgia. And mind you, I didn't speak any English really. I was still learning the language when we moved there. And so, what was I, third, fourth grade or something? And then we moved to Hawaii, the state of Hawaii. And I started fifth grade there in the middle of the school year. And in Hawaii, I remember just, all the people being from so many different places. When you live on a military base, all these schools that we'd gone to were all on military bases. And so people were from different parts of the world, different parts of the country. They looked as diverse as my community in Panama had looked, right? In Panama City, the capital, there's a lot of diversity, ethnic diversity there. Then moving from Hawaii, we moved to Alabama. And in Alabama, for the first time since we'd moved to the US, I had to start high school in a non-military school, in a non-military base school. So we had to go to a local school because there were no high schools on base. And that was the first time that I was confronted with a local community. It was in a small city or small town. The military base where we lived bused all of these high school students to off-base school. And I remember walking into the cafeteria and seeing Black students on one side, white students on the other side. My like first day of school and thinking, oh my gosh, I've only seen this in like civil rights movies. What is happening here? This is weird. Is this this is the 80s. This is not, we're not in the civil rights struggle that we were in the 60s or so. So that was really shocking to me. But I think that moment I made some decisions and some harsh judgments too about the community that I was living in, especially having traveled so much. And so I kind of limited my close relationships during high school to other military kids, which I thought would get me. I would feel like fit in more. And that was the case for the first couple of years of high school until I joined the band. And band just, a lot of people find themselves misfits and that are misfits end up joining band. Not everybody. There are some really cool people in band too, but that my life completely altered in school because I joined the marching band and then consequently concert and jazz bands. So that was my first experience feeling different, that it mattered to me, as at least my physical difference.
And did anybody say anything to you that made you feel othered or made you feel different? Because
Oh,
you're very aware of people and where they are in space and time,
yeah.
and you have this great radar. So, was there something pivotal that happened?
Mm. I can't think of a moment, but I have been called to my face and maybe overheard by others. this I don't know, call it a slur if you want to call it that. Oreo. Have you heard of this before? Oreo? Yeah, someone that
You need to
is
explain it for your listeners.
yeah, as someone that's defined as black on the outside, like an Oreo cookie, and white on the inside, right? Meaning because and here I was in the South of the US. Although this happens, I'm sure in a lot of other places, maybe even expat communities in other countries too. But the idea was, me as a black woman coming, or in this case, a black teenager coming into a community that was divided for generations by very harsh racist laws and cultural norms that my peers, their parents hadn't gone to school in integrated schools, right? So parents and grandparents, in many cases, had studied in segregated schools, those that were local to that community, and here I show up without that particular filter. And I learned English as a second language, and although started learning it in Georgia, I was surrounded by other military kids, and so I adopted a very indistinct, indistinguishable English speaking style. My mom calls it Hollywood English because I used to watch a lot of TV and Mr. Rogers and Electric Company and Sesame Street and all those shows. So learning a bit more neutral sounding English. So most people don't even know that I speak Spanish, to be honest. Every once in a while, someone with a very keen ear might pick up. So I think that was the only thing that was a bit that I would say people called me a name of some sort that made me, I don't know if it made me feel anything other than more judgmental about someone else's ignorance. But my brothers and I all have experienced that. We talk about it. I don't know if you talked about it in our podcast together, but yeah, so that was the one thing that I would say that stood out to me about being acknowledged that way. I don't know if that answered your question, if there's something else about the question that I may be missing.
It must have been very painful. And do you think this shaped who you are today?
Like I said, I think it made me, if the pain, maybe the judgment that I had about other people's ignorance shut a part of me down from connecting. And that person like me that loves, especially now as I'm older, love to connect with other people. I definitely missed opportunities to connect with others because I had them like, this is not a person with whom I want to have a conversation. I don't even want to know them. I don't want to know about them. I was actually voted most studious in the senior class, and not because I was like a highly studious person, but because I had shut down so much that I would just take books with me everywhere I went and would sit in a corner by myself, go to class early and read because I'm not going to talk to anybody, right? So I think from that perspective, I found a way to just kind of create a shell around myself, which was really lonely that first couple years of high school, walking around that way. So that was the piece that I think I suffered the most.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
What helped you crack the shell a little bit? Was it band, or was there somebody else or something else? Because I remember you talked about your band teacher having great influence on you. But was there something else that started the process of letting some light in?
I would say band probably had a huge impact. I did have some friends, some close friends. Again, they're all military adjacent, right? Their parents were in the military or retired from the military. So there's somehow we had that unspoken language of military kids, military brats, as people like to call us. That was really helpful, and I started to enjoy my time because I had these friendships outside of school. My mom also made sure that we were involved in everything. So we volunteered at church, we volunteered in the community events. We were connected to a lot of different organizations, the scouting organizations. So there were things outside of school that definitely shaped and helped me. There were definitely parts of light in other areas of my life. School just happened to be a very dim one, very dim light. Where school really brightened up for me was when I joined band. Um, Primarily because here I am surrounded by other students who comprise the same community that I've been judging, right, in my head, but just notice that, oh, there people are here are fun and I can really get to know them and I can let my guard down. And I feel like I don't have, at least to my face, felt the judgment that I may have experienced or intuited from other people. And so there, the light started to brighten up for sure. And then being put in a leadership position my senior year of high school, I think amplified that even more. But I don't want to discredit that community or where we live because there were so many things that came from it. In other areas of my life, I was involved in the Explorers program, a scouting program. My brothers were all Eagle Scouts or eventually got to Eagle Scout. And because we had such a strong connection with the scouting, with Boy Scouts, I was like a junior novice scout leader. I don't know, we made up some title. So during summer camp, I could go and support and volunteer at Boy Scout camp. So things like that were always a part of our lives. We played music, so we were all, I was in piano. So there were a lot. All of that to say, I want to acknowledge, especially my mom, because she really is the one that kept pushing us out to do these types of things. We never got stuck with how other people defined us. And I think that also was very healing in the places where it was a bit hurt or dim, but also showed us that there was more to it than maybe what I initially thought or that first impression. We were constantly pushed to, you want to do this? Go do it. You want to play the sport? Go play the sport. You want to go, and sometimes we didn't want to, but she saw her wisdom told her that it would be best if we did. And then I will say my dad, to give him credit, although his focus has been on his work in the military, he had never been held back from his desire to continue to grow and thrive by the color of his skin, by the accent in which he spoke, by his nationality. He made it to chief warrant officer in the Army. And he joined there was a cutoff, I think at age 34 at the time. He joined when he was like 33 years old. I mean, so against all odds, right? So I have parents like that shaped me. So I don't think I got stuck too long in any one, way of thinking because my parents were really continuously either modeling or pushing us to go beyond that. That's a very long answer to your question, but
No,
you're
it's
having
a
me
very
reflect on
interesting,
some things.
very interesting answer. And if there are people watching or listening, what would you advise for them, for their families, for their kids, for their nieces, their nephews, for the young people they know from that experience?
Hmm. Well, my mom always told us bloom where you're planted, which means whatever situation you're in, whatever community you live in, whatever job you have, find a way to bloom. And sometimes, you obviously see I have a lot of plants in my life now. Not all of them are blooming plants, but they're thriving in their own way. And part of it is they do have to have the right soil, the right amount of light, the right amount of water. You can give too much of a good thing. I have drowned many a plant because I thought, oh, look thirsty. No, they don't look thirsty. They are drowning. So I think the advice is find ways where you are to create the right environment for yourself. That means surround yourself with people that can see, hear, experience you in ways that are positive, that are really that are not just positive, but that are life enhancing. Sometimes it's just people that will help you laugh when you're down. They don't have to be like therapists or they don't have to be even a great listener. Maybe they just help distract you sometimes. I think with family, get to know your family. I think, examples of the conversation I had, like with my cousin Nuria, and others, cousins that I've interviewed over the years, until I started getting to know them and understand them, and not just from the family history or the family lineage, but really understanding them as people, they become much more interesting to me, and definitely connect to more of my family, my relatives, and even my own siblings and parents. To get curious about the people around us. So those are the main two things: get curious around the people around you, and then surround yourself with as many of people as you can that support the thriving environment.
We're talking about curiosity and family. You, for your last episode, interviewed your brothers,
Yeah.
and it was fabulous to hear them. I'd seen a couple of them on when we did Bridges to Inclusion, a program many moons ago.
Hmm.
I think Eduardo was there, and your mom was there, and Ava was there. And I'd love to know what surprised you about this podcast, the questions you asked, and what they said. And was there anything that you really were surprised about, or taken aback, or
Hmm.
kind of proud of, something that wasn't expected or wasn't
Yeah.
known to you?
I don't, because we talk so often. I talk to my brothers quite often. Not all four of us together all the time, but definitely when we do, we go pretty deep. So I don't know if there was anything that was surprising. I think the only thing that kind of stood out to me that I recall, and I didn't go back and listen to the whole episode again. That's the other thing. I'm just like, I've had so many conversations. But I remember my brother my older brother Eduardo at the very beginning saying something about kind of like a trauma bonding. There was a bit of trauma bonding for us, which I hadn't heard him say it quite that way. We knew and we all understood the circumstances, but yeah, I could see that. Yeah, there was a bit of trauma bonding for us. I think if on a few layers. One is being uprooted from a culture into a new one, right? So that kind of created it. My dad sometimes was also very, very challenging personality to live with and work with in some ways, and because there's a lot of other reasons. And I think so when my brother said that, it was kind of like, I don't think I ever saw that our connection was based on trauma, but okay, yeah, I could see that. I don't think he used the word trauma bonding. He used something else. Terror. I think he said the word terror. I was like, terror, what? I'm like, oh, that's trauma bonding. Okay, I get that. So that was an interesting layer I hadn't quite distinguished. But mostly I'm proud that we talked so openly and we answered all, we shared and answered questions. They answered the questions that I was asking. Each of their personalities shone through. I don't think any of them held back or, they were on their best behavior. I mean, they generally are. They're cultured, all Eagle Scouts, by the way. But it was interesting to just be able to have that open, easy conversation with them on such a public forum. So I'm proud of that. I'm proud that we could be authentic, even with the camera recording our words and being shared out with the world. And that's us. That's the four of us. We're this way everywhere we go. Of course, we know how to turn on and turn off when it's appropriate or inappropriate, but I do think our goal is always to hold each other with positive regard and share as openly as we can. And we had to grow this relationship. It was not always this way. We matured into it.
So, what did you do or what did you as a collective family do to grow the relationships?
Some I can't speak for them, but I know for me, I'll start with Eduardo. Dito is how we call him. He's my older brother. So he's a couple years older than me, quite introverted. I may have mentioned this in the podcast compared to me. And so we ended up going to the same university. He was 2 years ahead. And up to that point, I basically had just crossed him off my social list. He's not a person that I enjoyed hanging out with. He was not fun or funny, really. He was always too serious. I was too bookish. I was too quiet, too something. So I didn't connect. We didn't connect that much growing up. And until I went to college, and now I needed to build connection with people, and he was already quite connected. I even saw a side of him that I hadn't seen. It's like, oh, like people like you. And he will hate me for saying this story. I don't even know if I mentioned it on the podcast, but I remember girls especially saying, "Oh my gosh, your brother's so sweet and he's so cool." And I'm like, "My brother? What? Are you talking about the right person?" They all admired him so much. And they were like, "Oh, and how come you don't have an accent, Valerie, and your brother has an accent?" I'm like, "He does not have an accent." And then I would hear him interact with especially girls. And all of a sudden his name is Eduardo. He's not Ed or Dito or whatever. So, but I think with him in college, we started to spend more time together. And I think he started to grow and thrive in ways that maybe our nuclear family did not provide the environment for him to do so. So we created a whole different context for our relationship. Had we not gone to the same school and had a lot of common friends, I don't think we would have the relationship we have today. Spending time with somebody in a different context is huge. And so that would be some of the advice I give. Because we tend to get into patterns with especially family, right? Oh, this is how so and so always is. Well, if we could interrupt the pattern by moving into a different environment, that's always helpful. My younger brothers were a little bit easier because they were so young. There were 4 years different between me and them that um, it was like just growing up gave me a different perspective. And, when they all went their respective ways. Rolando and I also had to rebuild some relationship with him. He took off in a different direction than all of us, and I think for him, he would criticize me that I was judgmental about him and the path that he chose, and that I thought I was better than him. And so he didn't trust me for a long time because I was always lecturing him. And once I started to let go of that idea and started to get curious about him as a human, and like, why did you make the choices that you made? And teach me about you. I think our relationship started to rebuild. And I also started to share more openly. I didn't have to just be the big sister that had it all together. So I think interrupting the environment, but also interrupting the pattern of conversation helped tons.
You do a lot of work as an executive coach and work with a lot of people across many different industries and places and spaces. Is there a question that you would recommend to people who maybe need to connect with someone within their families that they're not really connecting with or see them differently? So is there a question or two that you'd like to offer them that they could use as a way to open up the conversation?
Mm. That can be a little tricky because it depends on the level of trust that's already inherent in the relationship. So let's start with somebody that has high trust, for example, like we talk all the time, we see each other. Sometimes it's just a matter of asking like a why question. Hey, tell me why you do it this way, right? It is easier to ask a why question or explain to me what you see in this, something that allows them to double click or delve into something with greater detail. If you have high trust, the chances that people will get defensive or have to justify are highly diminished. So if you have some high trust with people, get curious about why they think the way they think. Tell me the first time you started doing it this way or thinking this way. Where did that come from? When you have low trust, the way I do it is I lead with me. I start to open up and share things about myself, especially things that don't necessarily show me in the most flattering light, humanize me a bit. Like I did with my brother when he was, in some of his darkest times. The last thing he wanted was somebody to lecture him about how he should and how he shouldn't and why he should and how I did better and all those things. So I started to share the things that were difficult for me or ways in which I was challenged, sometimes asking for his advice when I had some challenges, because he was always very intuitive, very empathetic, very in touch with feelings. So find that thing that person is good at that seems to be natural to them. um, that's always helpful. And then I could either ask for advice or support and or share something that helps us become more human in their eyes. And I think even just doing that, whether or not they reciprocate is irrelevant. But I think opening up and sharing, hey, I don't even know how to talk to you. I've always been curious about you, but I know we don't know each other that well. And I don't know how to start. Even saying that could also begin the process of building trust and humanizing.
Well, it sounds like something that's going to be in your book, I imagine.
I not until you asked it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have so much. Like, do I need another chapter, Ingrid? Gosh, thank you.
Well, you have so much wisdom to share. Why not?
Maybe that's a different book. I don't know. I'm not sure yet. I'm just trying to get through this one.
I'd love to know more a bit later.
Sure.
So you're all about building human connection. We talked about sort of families. Let's talk about the wider world. The world at the moment is troubled. What have you learned about human connection that you can offer people as either an olive branch or offer people some hope?
Hmm. Ah, it is, the world is troubled. I don't think it's, here's a couple things I will say that I don't want to challenge the assertion you made, but just to look at it from a different perspective. We've always had challenges. It's part of the human condition. Every generation goes through its version of it, and sometimes it's amplified by just how many people are engaged in the challenge or how visible and transparent it is to everyone. And I think we're in a moment where it's highly visible and there's a lot of people being impacted, right? On world level. So I want to say that this is not unique to the history of humankind. If you wanted to know the exact history, ask my brother. He knows. He's read the books. This is coming from a place of my intuition and a place of my having observed and heard people and their stories and their experiences. The other thing I will say that's also given me pause about thinking so much about the global scale is I speak to a lot of people individually, and people are going through their own, right? Everyone's life is their own universe. In Spanish, we have a saying that's called cada cabeza es un mundo. Every mind is a world. Every mind is a world. And so when I hear someone that's going through, I have a friend who has a child that's on the autism spectrum. And as that child is growing older, it's becoming more and more difficult to know how to fulfill that child's needs. I have another person whose parent is very ill, and they're trying to figure out all the care that needs to be, the caretaking that needs to happen. Others who've been laid off from a job. So it's I try to keep the balance of what's really happening in the world is actually things that are happening to the people in the world, right? Some people are really upset by everything that's happening in the world because they're upset by it emotionally, but their life has specific particular challenges that are unrelated to all the things happening in the world. So I'm trying to get a bit of separation between those two things. Um, does that make sense, Ingrid?
It makes perfect sense. When you interview people, do you interview them about their world or the wider world, or is there an intersection between the two?
I would say starting with their world because that's what people know best and have much more intimate knowledge of. And then we expand to the wider world if it has some bearing or impact on what's going on outside as well. And yeah, so maybe the intersection is probably where we spend the most time.
And if people have, has anyone you've ever interviewed disappointed you or not given you what you thought you were going to get from the interview?
Not particularly. And I know you and I have talked about this. I think I know why you're asking. Has anyone, because so as you all, those that are listening and watching this, Ingrid, when you and I had our interview for Circle of Hope, one of the things that I think it came out towards the end of the conversation was, this need for a spicier conversation, right? A conversation that was a little bit more provocative because you're a person that delves into life and from your documentarian experience, but also that's who you are as a human as you're researching and seeing patterns and what's happening that you talk about the issues, you talk about politics. That's a lot of that's a you spent a lot of time and energy in that space. we didn't quite tap into it in a strong way during your interview. And I don't want to speak for you, but I recall this was one of those moments where I was focusing on your small world, probably more, where I think we kind of moved into the larger world, maybe like towards the latter part of the conversation for a brief amount of time. I'm speaking specifically to you. It was not disappointing in the least. I say this publicly for everybody to hear. There has not been a single conversation that I had with anybody on a podcast, any of the three podcasts, that I was left going, I'm not even going to publish that, or that's boring, or that's terrible, or that was hard, or any of those things. Not to say that I haven't had experiences that were challenging for me as a host, where I really felt like, oh my gosh, I have to figure out a way to keep this energized, or to get to drill into something that's, has some heart and meaning. I've done that too, but I've never ever said I'm not publishing that episode. Actually, that's not true. The only time that I've not published an episode, it was my first podcast, Time to Come Alive, and that's because the guest requested it. And so, and that was not something that I was going to negotiate about. This is a voluntary thing. No one's getting paid millions of dollars. There are no contracts really. Although I did start sending out a contract. Like, you all know that this conversation will be, published to the public. And because the guest requested not to have it published, I decided though. That was the only time in all of my years. So no disappointing here. I believe that every conversation is meaningful. That's kind of the whole point of the podcast too. Even the person sitting next to me on the plane, even the person I'm passing by on the street, whoever I have a moment with is a in the Course in Miracles, we call it oh my gosh, what is there's a phrase, I can't remember what it is. Anyway, but it's a special moment, right? It's a special moment with that individual for whatever that's meant to be. And I don't always have to control what happens. That whole idea of being open to outcome that you teach at the Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute was really, really embedded into my psyche.
Is there a spicy
Holy
question?
instant. Sorry, I'm sorry. I just remembered. In the Course in in the Course in Miracles, it's called a holy instant, right? That moment of life, or that spiritual moment that occurs between people. Sometimes is evident, sometimes is deep, but the idea is that I just want to honor whatever's meant to come out of this conversation, regardless of how long or how deep it goes.
So that's a good segue. You grew up going to church, and you're still very involved with the church, but you're also very spiritual. What are these what
But
are
you're
these
also, you go to church, but you're spiritual.
no, no, but you're into a different kind of spiritualism. It's the and,
I love
not but. There's no buts. And what have you learned? Because you delve a lot into realms that maybe some people in the church aren't comfortable about.
it. What have I learned about spirituality in particular, or about something?
Yes, about spirituality. What have you learned on that journey?
Um, I mean, it never ends, right? There's always layers that I'm uncovering that kind of show my values that sometimes evolve, sometimes they become more, more pronounced or expand. The more I travel, the more open to outcome, right? A spiritual outcome I have become. And I started traveling very young. Like I said, I moved to the country when I was 9. So from that perspective, just seeing the world, seeing how different people live, and how people eat, and how people communicate, and all those things have had me question more readily, like, what is truth, right? What is truth? We grew up going to the Salvation Army when we were in Panama, and we also did that while we were in Georgia and in Hawaii, and then in Alabama. the Salvation Army was so far away from us, just wasn't practical for us to get involved. And so we did a lot of things with our church growing up, but we ended up going to church on base, which was non-denominational. So Christian is our faith, right? The practice of our faith is Christian based. And it wasn't until I moved here to Dallas. I live in Dallas, Texas, for those that don't know. And I was very involved in the Salvation Army here when I first moved, because I found that there was a headquarters for the Southern Territory here in Dallas, and I'm like, "Whoa, that's pretty cool!" And I could do a lot of things. I was a Sunday school teacher, and I was in the choir, and I was in the advisory council or whatever. I mean, I was involved a lot. I was even the interpreter for. We had several Spanish speaking families, so I ended up doing a lot of interpreting for them during the services. But I also started to see that the, how do I say this? The business of church, the way in which church is organized, the certain principles, precepts, doctrines of any church, in this case, the Salvation Army was the one that I was attending, just started to bump up against the areas of life that I'd been already very open and welcoming. And by that point, I'd traveled to, I don't know, 20 plus countries. And when I started to see that, it was constantly bumping up, into, wow, I wasn't, what's the word? I'll give you a very specific example. Uh, no shade. The Salvation Army does amazing work in the community. The people I met were fantastic humans, right? No shade at all. But I think part of it was the structure of the church. I remember having a conversation with a gentleman who happened to be my mentor at the church. He was retired. He was a retired pastor and or officer, and he was diagnosed with cancer. And so one day, and this was one of the many experiences I had, but I remember one day he'd always been on the prayer list constantly. He and his family always on the prayer list because whatever form of cancer he had was not going away and it had to be treated. And I remember after service one day walking up to him and saying hello, like I would every Sunday after church. You just say hello to people, and so started to chit chat with him a bit. And I was, how are you? No, how are you? Like that whole dance that we did at the very beginning. And I just noticed like a fleeting look cross his face. Maybe it was pain, maybe it was tired, something that just didn't seem like he was okay or good or whatever he'd answered. And I asked, "How are you feeling?" And in that moment, he was just like, "I am in pain. I'm in pain right now." He'd had some stomach pain earlier that day he was experiencing. And then he shared that one of his children was going through something quite difficult that he and his wife were managing. And so after the conversation, it was a very brief interaction, somebody that I respect very highly. And he actually shared a book with me that kind of cemented my beliefs. He shared a book called The Wisdom Hunter. I can't remember the name of the author, but I'll put it in the show notes. Is a wisdom hunter, and is basically about a pastor of a mega church whose family life essentially crumbles, and he leaves the church and goes off on this journey, ends up in Europe, and has to kind of rebuild his faith. And I remember that reading that book coupled with some of the experiences that I'd had, I'm like, how's this person on the prayer list? We're going through these perfunctory conversations every Sunday. We have all these structures to help people in the worship process, but where's the healing? Where's the connection? Where's the humanity part of it? It was missing for me. It didn't feel like there was a process or program or structure that really enabled that easily. And so I left. After several of those types of interactions, I thought the container no longer fits, right? That container doesn't apply anymore to where I want to see life and lead. So I left the church, and I was out for like 7 years from going to church at all. And then I found Unity Church. I started going to Unity Church over the last 10 years. So yeah, 10 years now. That created a container that was much more malleable, much more open. There's no specific, it does have specific precepts and principles, but I feel they're much more malleable and adaptable. Right? For me, at this point in my life, I may change. But again, continuing to travel, and I was in India recently, and just the experience of going to Kerala, India, and seeing churches and mosques and Hindu temples all on the same block, within the small city or town was like, oh, if things could be this simple. And of course there are, myriad of religious practices, but I just thought, yeah, I want this kind of world for myself. So that's a lengthy spiritual answer, but I do think that now that idea of spirituality for me is about open, it's about connecting to the human need, is about allowing that to form. The structure can be loose, there, a little looser. I think the more tight we create the structure, the the smaller we have to be as humans so that we stay in the structure. And I'm no longer interested in that kind of spiritual life.
You were studying, was this your second time to study non-violent communication?
Yes.
And you told me about the time that you spent in an ashram there. Would you like to maybe share with your listeners and viewers a little bit more about that experience? Because I was very moved when you told me about it
Yeah.
and about what you'd learned from being there by following your intuition and staying at the ashram
Mhm.
rather than going and being a tourist. You decided to stay in the ashram and mentioned you had lots of massages every day, which was great, but one a day, which is great. But I'd love to know more from you about, because I don't know if you've shared any of this with
Mm,
any of the people you've interviewed over the last 30 episodes or more
yeah.
about what this journey that you've been on.
Mm. I hadn't shared much primarily because the last interview I did was a couple of months before I went on the trip. So that was kind of the logistics there. But you mentioned this is the second time. So I learned about nonviolent communication through Unity Church. When I started going there, I learned that there was a way of communicating that enhanced connection with people, by diminishing judgment and blame and really acknowledging feelings and needs. And we practiced it. And I took a workshop and I continued to use it as best I could. And even in my work has come in really handy. So when I asked the facilitator of that course, maybe a couple years now, I said, I'd like to know more. I'd like to become more masterful, but I don't want to teach it. I don't want to be a facilitator for nonviolent communication, but I want to be able to master it in a way that I can use it more effectively with more ease and share it. And she said, well, you might want to go to an intensive course. And I was like, okay. So I signed up for an intensive in California. And then as I was looking through the website, I saw that they have intensives in different parts of the world. I'm like, I don't have to take it in California. They do it in English in other parts of the world, same course. Huh. So I saw Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya on the list. So I'm like, oh, I want to go there. I've never been to Kenya. So I took it in Kenya last year. Well, this was 2020 and 2025. I took it in Kenya in spring. And it started to really revolutionize again this container of communication, container of values. When you're surrounded by 70 people from 20 different countries, all these different African countries. I think there were only like 5 people from the US, maybe another handful from Europe, but predominantly African countries represented there in the conversations about life and humanity and health and wellness. Like all those things take place in this context. It just continued to open my mind about what's important to people, especially when you're talking about feelings and needs, right? That level of humanity again. And so I loved it so much, spending, 9 days, 10 days there, made some wonderful friendships too that continue to this day. Um, in 2026, I saw the opportunity to do it again, and this time in India, in Kerala, India. And so I went once again, and I might go once more, who knows? But it was fascinating again to be surrounded by, this time, I think there were 90 of us, about 20 or so countries. Again, predominantly, this time we had a few more Europeans, but we also had a lot of people from all over the country of India. And so that was fascinating. Um, the thing that you're referring to specifically was although I went there for the course, I also have this connection to Indian culture. I love the food and the music, and I have wonderful friends here in Texas that have introduced me to so many different layers of Indian culture. One specific area of wellness is Ayurveda. Ayurveda is a science of life, and is thousands and thousands of years old, but a lot of it is focused through lifestyle and nutrition. And I knew that the birthplace of Ayurveda was South India, which is where Kerala is. And I thought, I need to have this experience with Ayurveda while I'm there, take advantage of every moment. And it so happened that I started to research once I knew I was going, research where I could go. And I saw all kinds of places. And I reached out to a colleague who is from that state. And I asked, hey, where would you go for Ayurveda here? What? And he said, well, where are you staying? Let me make sure that wherever I tell you is someplace close. And he said, Valerie, the place you're staying at is known for their Ayurvedic treatment. I was like, really? But it's like a Catholic ashram. What are you talking about? It's a retreat center. And he said, no, but right close by, there's the one that's very well known. And sure enough, I looked it up, and um, the reviews it had were people who were local, but they were all very positive reviews. And I reached out, and sure enough, I was able to get a space there. When I started interacting with some of the other participants who were interested in Ayurveda, participants of the course, the nonviolent communication course, many of them were going to resorts that were a lot more, well appointed. Near the beach or pools and amenities that the place that I selected did not have. The place I selected was in a very small town, small community. There was no pool. There were some farm animals around. I mean, we were like in the countryside, basically. And I started feeling a little jealous. I was like, oh, I wish I'd gone to the beach and that would have been so nice. But I kept like, going back to my spirituality, I do have this very uh, rich inner life and this voice within me, that spiritual voice within me that lets me know yes or no when I make certain decisions. And that was a decision that had a very clear yes, this is where you need to be. And so I didn't make any changes. I ended up going, and sure enough, not only did I receive massage every day because that's part of the treatment, I was there for 5 days. But I didn't realize how much of my life was go, 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 including while I was in the 5 day course. We're up at 6 in the morning and usually going to bed like 8, 9 o'clock at night because we had classes and meals and all kinds of things. And going into this different phase, this Ayurvedic experience allowed me to, one, just rest. They brought all the meals to my room. Most of the people did not speak English very well, and so I had to learn a few words in Malayalam. Like nani, which is thank you, and namaskar, so hello, things like that. But I also got like very local meals, and the experience of interacting with people from that community was exactly why I travel in the first place. I don't travel because I want to have a touristy experience. I travel because I want to connect with people from those cultures. And so, and the place I was in was predominantly for women who had gone through postpartum women, right? Mothers. And so that was their claim to fame. A lot of people that went with their newborns, their women who had just gone through, whatever they went through in childbirth. They brought their moms or their mother-in-laws were there, and it was strictly for women. And so it was so cool then afterwards when I had a chance to go out into the little balcony and sit around and talk to some of these women. Again, many cases they did not speak the language. So I'm here with my little app saying, how do you say this in Malayalam? And just beautiful experiences, getting to know myself, getting to know others. And I always say that travel, the reason I love travel is because it introduces me to a different part of myself, the part of myself that I don't know that I would be interested in this language, or I would like this food, or I would like this music, or that I would be, this comfortable. And I found myself being incredibly comfortable in India. And I may have had a past life there. That's how comfortable I felt. I did a little bit of the tourism part too. I'm so grateful. I did make some great friends in India as well, who introduced me to some of the local flavor and food and that sort of thing. But I think more than anything, what it again just kind of uh, expanded my understanding of myself, my tolerance, my willingness. 12-year-old Valerie would not have eaten anything that she did not recognize. Nothing. She would have gone on a fast. She would have been like Gandhi. No food, no drink. I don't know what that is. I'm not touching it. So 12-year-old Valerie was watching over me going, "You're gonna eat that? That's amazing." I tried everything, whether I recognized it or not, and 98% of what I had, I loved. And so that I didn't know that part of me was there, right? So I'm so grateful for that.
You come alive when your whole face comes alive when you speak about it. Clearly, it's a place that
Yes.
I don't know if you plan to return to, but it made a
Want
huge
to.
impact on your life. And I
Yeah.
look forward to reading about how you bring that impact into your work going forward.
The impact of my trip to India, or what do you
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
Because just because of how you
My
transcended into
glow.
this really, your whole body language changed.
Yeah. Ah, thank you. I mean, it's been pretty recent. It's only been a couple of months. Not that that has any bearing on how excited I am about it, but I do find that this is life kind of gives us opportunities to challenge ourselves. I often tell leaders that I work with not to worry so much about doing everything perfectly or being comfortable, but to give ourselves range. Like, know that we're not stuck with anything. Just because you grew up here, or just because you studied this career, or just because you've worked in this company, just because you married this person, just because does not leave us stuck in any way, right? Part of our job is to unstick ourselves by expanding our experiences, our perspectives, trying new things, new ways, having conversations with people who may have tried things that we haven't tried, if nothing else, just to get a glimpse and just practice the range. It's like building muscle where muscle did not exist, or getting rid of that tension that perhaps, just easing the tension that we've had, that constraint that we've established. And so I love when I have experiences that do that for me. And that's, I think, part of the joy is, India was special, amazing. I loved every second that I was there. I'm sure I would love a lot of other places I visited. I think this was my 33rd country in my life. And so I've had a lot of those growing experiences, but that was the latest one, and I don't plan to stop.
That's absolutely wonderful. Having spent 4 months in India in 1990, it changed me in amazing ways too.
Yes.
How how has your work in your podcasts and reflected in the way, because you've done a TED talk and you're now working on a book, how is this all reflecting going forward into your next endeavor, or the next, what I say, what I often say in my coaching is next mountain to climb. You
Mhm.
know, how are you taking all these experiences and using it, and what are you going to use to build?
I don't know if I know an answer to give you. Like, I don't have the answer for you. I do
Range. What's the
the
range?
range.
You're
What's the
expanding
range?
your range. You're expanding your range. So how is that going to be reflected going forward?
Yeah. Well, I think I don't necessarily want to limit myself to the work that I do based on what I this particular area, right? But it's something that I noticed so strong in me, this idea of relationship building, this idea of helping people connect. I even recently started, especially because I'm writing this book and having to go back and think about when did that begin and why did I just do it this way, or like starting to reflect on things. For example, when we did my family podcast, for several years during the pandemic, for 4 years, we had a family podcast, not just my brothers and me. I'm talking like every month I would get together with relatives, mostly my dad's side of the family, and we'd interview a member of the family. We went through 3 generations, and it's like, when did that begin? Like, why? And so I start to see that this desire that I always have to connect people, to connect myself with people, that is so, it's that little thread is in everything I do. So I don't know what the next mountain is, Ingrid. I do think that it's going to be more of that. Even when you asked me earlier, like, how does one build connection with people in their family? And the distinguishing, of when there's high trust and low trust, it's not something that I do so intuitively that even as I'm answering some of these questions, I'm like, okay, well, this is clearly something that I care a lot about, have a lot of experience. I put myself out there to expand on. So there's probably more there that I haven't even uncovered, that I haven't actually shared, that I haven't necessarily leveraged. And not always leverage as a business, but just leverage as a place to share or contribute more. I'm I'm open. I'm learning about myself as I'm writing. I'm learning about the relationships that I have as I'm speaking with people. And that's the only commitment that I can make right now, is that I'm going to continue to learn. And then I love sharing what I learn. So that's this is what's happening right now. I am sharing what I'm learning.
Well, that is wonderful. That's spoken as true teacher
Mm,
in the broader sense of the world, because
yeah.
you have a message and you have something to share, and you're helping reframe the world and helping people reframe themselves. And I imagine your book will help people reframe their own
Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah.
Is there something about reframing your life? Because you've had many iterations in your life.
Hmm.
You went the traditional route, work. First of all, you didn't go the traditional route. You spent 5 years traveling the world with your youth educational
Up with
program.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, up with people. And then you went the more traditional route,
Hmm.
working for people like the Hyatt.
Yeah.
Then you kind of blossomed and expanded. And I've been very lucky to see, I met
Mm.
you at that pivot point,
Yeah, you
and
did.
I've just seen you just grow and blossom and have so
Mm.
much to share the world. Is there a message of hope that you can give people in the world? Because we spoke about sort of everybody's got a personal universe. You
Yeah.
mentioned the Spanish, but is there a message of hope that you would like to give to people that are struggling in the wider world, or with where we
Mm.
find ourselves in the world today?
Yeah. Is there a message? I think there's always something to say. I don't know if this is the message, kind of like what you asked earlier about the answer. Okay, so one of the areas that comes up a lot, there's a lot of contention is in the world of politics in the US, right? All over the world has their version of what's happening here. There's all kinds of craziness happening, so much unpredictability. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of impact on our global markets, the economy, and the work world. Like, there's a lot happening. And so what's helpful for me is knowing, I remember when Facebook first came out, it's a little bit aside, but when Facebook first came out and you had to identify like your religious, your affiliation, your political affiliation, your like all of that. I remember for religious, I said spiritual. I'm not Protestant or Catholic or I'm spiritual. And then political affiliation was like Republican or Democrat, and I was like spiritual.
That confused them.
I mean, that they just wanted to put a label on it, which is fine. But so here's a perspective. Again, it's not a message, but here's a perspective. I went to the University of Alabama for college, and graduated with a degree, 2 degrees in public relations and Spanish. Because I've been in the band, and thank God for Mr. Bullish, my band director, got me those 2 years in marching band. I was the captain of the color guard my senior year. I'd built enough skill and ability to join the marching band at the University of Alabama, which is called the $1 Million Band. Band is humongous. At the time I joined it, there was maybe 400 people in the band. There were 30 plus people in the color guard. And I had enough skill, even those 2 years in high school gave me enough skill and ability to try out and audition and actually make the band. I was in the band for 2 years. Every game that we went to, the University of Alabama has a history of a very strong football culture, right? And so I'm getting to your point, but I want to do this like a demonstration, a little metaphor here. So, strong football culture. And in this very strong football culture, you develop school spirit. That's how you belong in this space. It happened to me in high school. That's what those 2 years of high school that I joined the band gave me school spirit, an appreciation and an acknowledgement and a belonging to this place that I'd shut off, right? High school. College, I went right into the band and boom, school spirit right there. So here we are wearing our red and white uniforms, we marching into Bryant Denny Stadium for our home games, and throngs of people lining the walk. We call it the elephant stomp. Our mascot, was there there's this elephant mascot that we have that's there in the front, and the drums, and everybody's going and cheering. Wow. I mean, it was love and it was appreciation. And there was this sense of esprit de corps and amazing. And you know that you're protected and you're wanted and you're admired and even envied by people because you have this sense of belonging, right? This microcosm of belonging in the band. We had our own section in the stadium that we'd sit in, and it was protected, and we had security that helped us get in and out of the stadium, like all the things. Here's the thing. I don't like football that much. I can't stand watching the games most of the time. So much so, I would take books with me. See, this is my pattern, right? Shut the world out, get a book. I had been talked to because Valerie, this game is being televised, put the book away. Right? Just like, can we just have our 8 minutes to do our thing on the field and go home? No, we had to be there for the whole game. And granted, some games were amazing. Were against Auburn or against Florida. I mean, like all these wonderful rivals brought out the best in our team, and I'm standing and cheering along with the best. And some were just like, eh. But then when we were in games that we traveled to away from home, and we would go to another rival school, a very strong rival. I also had the experience of that elephant stomp that we did with cheers and boos and people throwing beer cans and rocks at the band. We're not even playing the game. We're just there to play music. Oh my gosh, right? And all of a sudden that belonging and that sense of aliveness and that community and esprit de corps, like we really had to get close together as a band just to make sure that we protected ourselves and stay connected. And we're like this small pool in the wider circle of people that were loyal to the other opposing team. I say all of this because the world of politics has taken on a very similar tenor. Belonging, human belonging, and connection is absolutely necessary and essential for every human being to survive and thrive. It's necessary. People do not get by very far, very long on their own. Not without looking over your shoulder every 5 minutes, not without being exhausted, not without, right? And eventually your well-being being questioned or compromised. When it comes to politics, I notice that the same fervor for belonging to a team that's winning and with a team that's in the majority or whatever is very high. And you get very tight and very constricted when you're not and defensive. So And people tend, and I don't know if I had this conversation with you, but I started asking a few people in my life, because I have people that aren't, that like both team, that like either team, they have their preferences. I would ask them, when was the first time you decided to vote? Like, I asked a question about, when did you notice you were white? I would ask, like, when did you realize that you were a Republican? Or when did you realize that you were a Democrat or a liberal or whatever, or libertarian? And amazing, amazing. So that's a question, by the way. Ask people in your life when they decided to vote the way they did. When was the first time you voted that way, and what prompted you? And oftentimes, the people in my life, nearly all of them said it started from home. Well, my parents were the same party. We only talked about Republicans at home. These were the people that my parents voted for. That's what we talked about at the dinner table. Oh, my parents have always been Democrats, and I've always da, 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 da. My neighbors. So one is the environment that these people were planted in. That's where they bloom. And then it was reinforced. And oftentimes, like a sports team, if you ask someone that from Dallas if they like the Cowboys or not, oftentimes you'll hear Cowboys don't do that well in football. The little I know about football, I know that much. The Dallas Cowboys are not the strongest team. I don't know the last time the Cowboys went to the Super Bowl. Like, I don't know the stats, but I can tell you really with certainty that it's not the strongest team. But guess what? You walk around Dallas, you will see people in their gear, cowboy t-shirts and hats, and the trucks emblazoned with cowboy, logos, you name it. It is, there's stores in the airport that you can buy Dallas Cowboys paraphernalia, right? So are we as attached to our political views as we are to our sports teams? And often, if you ask someone why they joined the sports team they joined, same thing. Because my dad or my uncle, or I got a hat when I was little, or somebody gave me a sticker. And the impact that these alignments or these affiliations have on our greater world and greater life are so deep and so profound that it's painful to uncover that the selection that sometimes are the selections that we make have so little bearing, has such a I don't even know what the word is, such uh help me out here. There's such a thin layer to support the perspective and the experiences that one has. But you bought the t-shirt, you bought the hat, you have the truck logo, you have the license plate cover, you have invested in the mugs and the things, right? Um, do you throw them away when you don't see the team doing well? And I'm talking about politics now too, right? You have buttons, you have voted, you have defended, you have so I think I want to hold it as light as I did those football games. I go, I perform, I vote. Yes, I vote for the candidate that I think will do the best job. Yes, I do pray about it. I fill out my ballot before I go to the thing, so I'm not influenced by the notices on the little, all those signs. I vote with my conscience, with who I think is going to do the best job. That's all I can ask people to do. I don't really care if you vote one way or the other, but do so consciously. That's really the message. Do so consciously. If you don't want to get into the drama and the game, take a book, turn off the news, or put on a podcast that you enjoy. We don't have to get engaged in all the drama, and you can still participate. I don't think I've ever put it together quite like that, Ingrid, so I'm really proud of myself right now. Like putting all these things, but that was a very in-depth description of how I feel about politics. And so when people ask me, I'm kind of like, I watch the game, is interesting sometimes, but most of the time it's not interesting enough to steal my peace. So I'll do something that I think is much more impactful. And then I'll still go. I'll go and I'll vote and I'll do the things that I know to do in a conscious way. But I hope that people are as conscious about the way in which they got involved into supporting the team that they chose. And that if the team is not doing well, pray for the coach, bless them, do whatever it is that you think it's to support the people who are playing the game. I'm not against that. In fact, I'll just share one more thing. There's this app called Five Calls, where you can reach out to your Congress people and whatever. And and share, here's what I care about, and this is what you should think about. And I did recently do it. It's not something I do a lot, but I was just something was on my heart that I needed to share, and I did. And the only thing I could do was pray. I literally left a voicemail saying, pray. I pray for their wisdom. I pray for their compassion. I pray for that they're connected to the right people and the information that whatever they choose and decide is going to be for the best of all involved. I can't pretend to know what that is. And my job was not to be there to judge them, but simply to know that, there's a bigger plan at work here. I don't want to get in the way of that plan. So I vote and I pray.
That is a
Whew,
wonderful answer.
you got me all riled up.
Yeah,
Well,
because
let
I
me hear
was going
you.
to ask you if is there any spicy question that I should ask that I haven't asked yet? And is there
No,
any question that you wish that I didn't ask?
no, I mean, that got pretty spicy. I don't know if I've ever shared any of those views publicly, but I'd love to hear your reflection on that. Whether, yeah, something resonated for you or what, yeah, what's your 2 cents?
I agree that people follow their team. That it's often the team of their, as you say, their parents or their grandparents or their, the local gang or whatever it might be. They will follow, they will choose to follow. And what I struggle with is how does one encourage people to question the status quo when things are being done in our name that don't sit well with me or don't resonate with me? How what power do I have, or what questions can I ask that might help people see that following somebody blindly is not necessarily in the world's interest?
Mm,
Never mind one's personal interest, but in the world's interest. Because I'm lucky, I have choices.
yeah.
But there's so many people in the world that have no choices. There's so many places in the world that people have no place to go, or have been, they their lands have been annexed, their lives have been destroyed, their homes have been destroyed, their lives have been upended. And how, when I had a conversation with someone recently who said, I trust that the people in government have more information and I will follow them because I know that they have access to information that I have no access to. And I was quite taken aback by that answer because this person watches a lot of news and very well informed,
Yeah.
I thought. And I was quite taken aback by that answer. And I think how do we, and this is a question for you, how do we encourage people to question the status quo, to pray, or to do whatever that is that they need to do, to look at their own conscience and say, is this what I want done in my name?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is a quote that Martin Luther King said, that we have very little moral influence over people that can sense our underlying contempt, right? And so it's kind of like the going back to my conversation with my younger brother, right? In the times when I was in the heartiest of disagreements about his process and his lifestyle and all the things, I had a lot of contempt. I had a lot of judgment. I had a lot of, self-righteousness, really. And so, what I've done recently is read some books. Like there's a book, the name of the person escapes me, but it was about morality. I'll put these in the show notes.
Great.
And talked about how people who have conservative leaning when it comes to politics, conservative leaning or liberal leaning, have a different standard of morals. There's 5 different domains of morals. I can't remember the author's name, Robert something, I think. Anyways, and and they have a different meaning. So inherently, people are just seeing from a different lens. The problem is, instead of, we become opposing teams, and we really just we want a good game. We want a game that everybody can cheer for, right? We like the Olympics brings people from all different sports and disciplines together, and just like we want to cheer for our the best of the best. I think we've broken ourselves down so much into these little factions because of all the judgments that we have against each other, that we forgot about the game that's being played. And I think what you're pointing to is that there's a game being played, people making decisions that are impacting us in negative ways all the time. And we are supporting it, we're turning a blind eye to it, or whatever. And so I think the way we start, number one, is rather than judging people for having voted the way they voted or for supporting the way they support, is just asking the question, like, what made you decide that this is where what you wanted to vote for? Like having a sense of curiosity. We have to come from a place of wanting to know and not wanting to judge or change that person. Very few people would change because we like, that doesn't make any sense. Here are the facts. Did you see? Let me send you a link. Here's a. No one does that. What we end up doing is defending and protecting our stance more than anything. So a sense of compassion and a sense of curiosity gets us much further. And our job is, and I'm learning this as a coach too, my job is not to change my people, my client's mind or my brother's mind. My opportunity here is to connect and build enough trust so that we can have a conversation where they can also express their challenges about something. If all the energy is spent on protecting and defending, there's going to be very little space and energy for connection. And so I call it the iceberg of connection. You know, like I think I've shared something online about this, but you know, this iceberg, we talk about the iceberg of communication, and that iceberg is, you only see a very small percentage of the iceberg at the above the surface of the water. The bulk of the iceberg is below. Well, consider that when people are talking about all the things that they support, is just the surface of the iceberg. Is the policy that they heard that they say, oh, I like that, or the thing that was done that they say, oh, that's cool, or oh, I hate that. If we could just go below the surface, at least just one click, and say, what is it about that that's meaningful to you? Or even just reflect back, hey, I noticed that you like these few posts and that you call out this particular action. You know, can you explain a bit more to me? And the last book I read, um, it's called The Cult of Trump. I'll just say it, The Cult of Trump. And in the book, this gentleman, his name is Steve Hassan, he's the author, and he talked about how he was a part of a cult when he was young, and his family would try to, and implying basically that the kind of hoopla and the kind of fervor that there is around this particular administration has a lot of similarities in cult behavior. Again, not as a judgment, but as an observation of some of the patterns that he's experienced. And so he talked about how when he was in this cult for like 2, 3 years, his family would be like, are you nuts? What are you talking about? Well, how dare you? They're brainwashing you. And that was exactly the thing that they needed to say for him to double down. It wasn't until they were able to take some distance. He had an injury he had to nurse, and he was away from all the news and all the things, and they could start to empathize with him and learn more about what drove him or what attracted him, that he was then himself able to make connections about things that didn't seem to jive, things that were inconsistent with what he learned and what he saw, what he'd seen. And that's, I think, the approach that we could take. If we could just go one click below the surface, and rather than get stuck up here and all the judgment and the morality, just like, what is it about this that disturbs you or bothers you? And when did you determine that that was important to you? Those two questions, if done with compassion and curiosity, not judgment, will reveal a lot more, and we will stop being enemies of one another, and we can start identifying, like, how do we want to play this game together? You know, and that being the infinite game, you know, like James Carson wrote in the book Infinite Games, the infinite game of life, the infinite game of politics is never going to go away. It's always going to be there in some way, shape, or form. our job is to keep the game going, but to enjoy the play of the game. And I think that's where we miss sometimes. We forgot to enjoy the play, and we're blaming and shaming the players and or the fans. Like, and then we miss the game.
I think that's probably a very good place to end this conversation, although I'd like to continue
On
because
that
we have
note.
done much. We have done work in the various other spaces about building bridges, and so, but I think
Yeah.
this is probably a good place to end this conversation. Is there anybody or anything that you would like to say or call out or message to your myriad of fans that have been following you across all your three podcasts over the
Yeah.
years?
Well, first of all, I want to start with you, Ingrid. I am grateful not only for this conversation, but I know the care and consideration that you put into this, to having conversations like this, and not just with me. I'm sure with a lot of people in your life, the career that you've had, and you asked me early on when we discussed doing this to point out some of the episodes that I thought would be helpful for you to watch and some context for you, and your superpower is research. But not just that, you just don't stick with the surface. Your conversations have always been below the surface, and so I'm grateful that you model exactly what we're talking about and what I've been sharing today. Is there's always an opportunity to go below the surface. We don't have to get stuck with what's printed on the news or all the storylines that I think would be helpful or interesting to talk about. You moved well beyond them, and places that I hadn't even considered going to. So my first appreciation and acknowledgement is to you for being that human in my life, but also being that person in the world. And I can't wait to see where you continue to your next mountain, as it were, about and continuing to provide this for us and contribute that. So thank you for this.
It was an
Um,
honor. Thank you.
yes. And then for others, I think, people who've been following and listening to this podcast, I'm grateful that there's an interest. I've always had this desire to share the conversations that I have in my life with others, and that's what these podcasts have been. They're conversations that I have in the world. And so that's why I don't always distinguish them, like, what difference has this podcast made? It's because it's a conversation that I would have with this person. We just put it on loudspeaker and record it for posterity. And I remember my mom early on saying, "Oh, do they have to be so long? Maybe you can do them. Most podcasts are like 30 minutes, right? Or 15." And I'm like, "Nope, not mine." And I'm also attracted to podcasts that are lengthier. Give me a 1 or 2 hour podcast anytime. And sometimes it might take me a few days to watch it, but nonetheless, I love that opportunity to go deep. And so I don't take for granted that anyone that's been following any of my podcasts have had to devote hours of their lives to watching and listening to them. So I hope and pray that whatever you listen to and whatever you watch had an impact, it was a meaningful time spent and energy invested in what we had to say in the podcast. So grateful again for that devotion of time. And then for all the people who have been guests, and I think podcasting is going to be one of my favorite forums and platforms to share experiences, ideas. I love conversations, and I love being able to have them in this type of forum. But I'm also aware that it takes something for people to come and share true opinions and experiences out loud with others. I don't take that for granted. So I'm so grateful that everyone that has said yes, and 99% of the people that I invited said yes. Actually, to be fair, it's been 100%. Some people just never got around to scheduling, so it just didn't happen. But 100% of the people that I asked said, "Of course, yes, I'm happy to. Thank you." So I'm grateful for that willingness. I'm grateful for that courage. So I do think it takes courage to be able to share. This is not talking about your expertise in some subject. It's talking about you. Well, actually, I guess the expertise is yourself. And so those are the places where I wanted just to call out and acknowledge the investment of time, the effort, the energy, and the willingness of those that have participated and those that listen. That's
Well,
it.
I look forward to hearing and seeing your book and hearing your next podcast when you decide to do it.
Same. Thank you so much, Ingrid. I'll just close us out by saying this book is still in progress. I'm probably gonna, I don't know if I'm gonna talk about the book in a separate episode or something, but this podcast has informed the book and vice versa. As I write the book, it inspired me to reach out to certain people to invite to the podcast. And so that's likely going to continue. My goal is to have this book by the end of this year have some form. I don't know what that is. We're in 2026 right now. We're still in the first quarter of 2026 as we're recording this right now. So by the time this airs and or by the time somebody watches it in the future, I hope that you have a book next to you. And I will continue to use the conversations from the podcast to support the content of the book. And I'm not sure exactly what shape yet, but that was one of the reasons I started it. I wanted to share it as an example and a model. Here's how we build relationships. Here's how we sustain them. Here's what gets in the way. And here's how we can make a contribution to other people. So that will continue to be the message from that the book will highlight, and then I will use content from this, from these episodes to support it as we go on. So we're not done yet. I'm not done. I'm not sure what the next form will be, but so stay tuned, everybody. I'm so grateful for everybody that tuned into this episode. Please go back and watch some of the ones that Ingrid referenced in our conversation. I think you'll maybe see it through different lens. And also other old podcasts. I have all of them right now on Spotify and YouTube, and pretty much every your favorite podcasting platform will likely have it. So thank you.
And can I add, if you have a teenager, go and listen to the podcast about Lucy. We never had time to talk about it, but Lucy is amazing.
Ah, yes, my niece Lucy. Lucy is this 2026. She's graduating from high school right now. And oh, thank you for mentioning her too, because I started this Circle of Hope podcast in the beginning of 2025, knowing that I needed to put it out there in the world and start having conversations. But I was recording them, cataloging them, and did not have really the bandwidth to do all the things that one needs to do with podcasts to put it out in the world, artwork, some editing, descriptions, like all of those things. I just did not have the bandwidth to do it. My DIY instinct, right? So I, in the summer of 2025, my niece and I, Lucy, were having a conversation in which she expressed interest in doing something for the summer, doing having a summer job. And in a kind of a circuitous, very lovely way, we landed on the opportunity for her to be my production assistant for the podcast. And it was a paid internship for her. And she was the one that began to coordinate and put the artwork together, the descriptions for all the podcasts, uploading them, like doing all the things that the time that it required to put this out into the world was possible because of Lucy Hope. So Lucy, thank you. You get an extra special shout out because you are the person that got the ball rolling. And she did so throughout the entire summer and set things up. And so the last few episodes that she had to go back into school mode to finish her senior year strong, she set me up so that I was able to do on my own with very little effort. So thank you for bringing up Lucy, Ingrid. I'm sure she will be so grateful that I did not forget. This would not be out in the open or anywhere online had it not been for her commitment and to supporting and supporting me and getting it out there. Yes. Okay. Any other person? Am I forgetting anything else, Ingrid?
I think that a celebration is called for. This is a wonderful celebration of an amazing person who's had an extraordinary life and has so much more to offer that hours of podcasting cannot give you the value of Valerie.
Thank you very much. I receive it. I receive it. And yeah, it's a celebration. I think I impress myself sometimes too. I'm like, whoa, where'd that come from? How did I end up doing this? But it's something that I think if we all tap into those natural God-given gifts and talents that we have, we find a very easy path uh, of creativity, and then connecting with the right people, just kind of closing this out, connecting with the right people to amplify them, to expand them, to cement them. That's what that circle of hope is so important, is so crucial. And we're filled with them. We're filled with people. Part of it is we just have to pivot and find the right people for the right time, for the right project, or for the right moment in our life, and for things to come to fruition. I think, a marching band is not made up of only French horns. You need to have the snare drum, you need to have the xylophone, you need to have the trumpets and the woodwinds, all those things in order to create a full sound. I think with the circle is the same thing. You'll want a variety of people in different parts of your life highlighting different areas and elements to bring it all together. So thank you all again for tuning in to this episode of Circle of Hope. Stay tuned for future, whatever the next iteration of this will be, and the book. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Circle of Hope. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and share with someone in your circle. And if you're curious about the upcoming book, visit valeriehope.com for updates and extras. Until then, stay connected.